My name is Elena Thompson, and I'm 25 years old. But 5 years ago, I stood outside my parents' house in Fargo, North Dakota, shivering under a sky heavy with snow, as their words sliced through me, sharper than the winter wind. Don't come back here ever again. Those words didn't just echo, they shattered something inside me. The flakes fell in thick, blinding sheets, clinging to my lashes as I stood there with my duffel bag, my breath clouding in the air, trying to decide whether to beg them to take me back or to finally walk away. The porch light flickered against the storm, illuminating the frost that had already settled on the steps. The same steps I used to sit on as a kid, tying my shoelaces before heading to school, believing this house was my safe place. That night, it wasn't. It was a cage with the door slammed shut. I walked away, boots crunching in the snow, heart pounding like a drumbeat of betrayal. My parents thought I'd fail, that I'd crawl back begging, that the storm outside would break me faster than their words, but it didn't. That night, I learned that being thrown out wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of everything. If you've ever been rejected by your own family, you'll understand the mix of anger, disbelief, and quiet strength that bubbles beneath the surface. Stay with me, because this story isn't about weakness, it's about how I turned rejection into power. Growing up in Fargo, I was always the other daughter. My sister, Teresa, was the golden one, the success story, the framed graduation photo in every hallway. Our parents, Patricia and Howard Thompson, ran our modest house like it was a kingdom built on discipline and image. Mom had this permanent tightness in her voice, as if life was one long checklist she needed everyone to complete for her. Elena, sit straight. Elena, don't talk back. Elena, be more like your sister. Those words were the soundtrack of my childhood. Dad was quieter but firm, his silence often louder than her criticism. Mom believed success was measured in degrees, designer suits, and dinner parties that left her guests impressed. Dad measured it in obedience. I measured it in survival. I remember sitting at the dinner table as a teenager, the smell of roasted chicken mixing with tension so thick it felt like I couldn't breathe. Teresa would talk about law school, about her internship, about how one of her professors said she was exceptional. Mom's eyes would shine, her laughter loud and proud. Then, they'd turn to me. And you, Elena? What are your plans? I'd mumble something about art or writing, and Mom's lips would tighten. You need something practical, she'd say, her voice clipped, like my dreams were a messy stain on her perfect white tablecloth. I'd swallow my resentment with each bite, telling myself that someday, I'd prove I wasn't just the background character in my own family. It wasn't until much later that I realized our home had been cracking long before I ever rebelled. A therapist once told me that 33% of parents report high stress from family expectations, and I believe it. Mom was one of them, though she'd never admit it. There were signs of burnout everywhere, like the way she'd slam cabinets when bills piled up, or how she'd stay up past midnight, scrolling through social media and comparing our lives to families she thought were doing better. One night when I was 10, I woke to the sound of her crying in the kitchen. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air as I peeked around the corner. She was sitting at the table, clutching a stack of papers, whispering, "I can't do this anymore." Dad stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, silent. They didn't notice me watching. The next morning, everything was back to normal. Mom's lipstick perfect, her smile tight, but that image never left me. It was the first time I saw her not as the cold perfectionist she appeared to be, but as someone drowning in her own expectations. Still, that didn't make the years that followed any easier. If anything, her stress hardened her, her control tightened. And I, her youngest, became her favorite target for disappointment. Teresa, my sister, was everything I wasn't. Calm, focused, predictable. I used to envy her ability to make our parents proud with so little effort. She never argued, never questioned. When she graduated with honors and got a job at a local law firm, Mom threw a party that filled the house with champagne and laughter. I remember standing by the window, the cold glass against my forehead, staring out at the snow drifting past the streetlights, while voices behind me buzzed about how Teresa has such a bright future. No one noticed I was gone from the room. I'd always been invisible when she was around. By the time I was 17, I started rebelling, not out of spite, but out of desperation to feel something real. I'd skip family dinners to hang out at the local record store, the air thick with the scent of vinyl and coffee. That's where I met Daniel Reed. He was 25, worked as a mechanic, and had hands that smelled faintly of engine oil and pine soap. He wasn't like anyone I'd met before, quiet, grounded, and real. While everyone else in my life spoke in expectations, Daniel spoke in dreams. He'd talk about opening his own garage one day, about how fixing cars gave him peace. His voice had this steady warmth that made me forget how small I felt at home. With Daniel, I could finally breathe. We'd sit in his old pickup truck by the Red River, watching the reflection of the moon shimmer on the water. I told him things I'd never told anyone, that I felt like a ghost in my own family, that every "why can't you be more like Teresa?" felt like a knife. He listened. Really listened. And when he laughed, it wasn't cruel or condescending. It was like he saw me. I fell fast, maybe too fast. But when you've spent your whole life starving for validation, even a little warmth feels like sunlight. Of course, my parents didn't see it that way. When I told Mom about Daniel, she looked at me as if I'd confessed to a crime. "A mechanic?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disgust. "You're meant for better than that, Elena." Dad didn't say much, but his silence was approval enough of her judgment. From that day on, Daniel was branded as the mistake. They tried everything, introducing me to family friends' sons, sending me college brochures, even manipulating Teresa into talking sense into me. "They just want what's best for you," she said one afternoon, her tone soft but detached. I remember laughing bitterly. No, they want what's best for them. It was around then that I started noticing how much their obsession with control resembled fear of being judged, fear of losing face. Studies say 65% of parents experience burnout, trying to maintain appearances, and I could see it in every wrinkle around Mom's eyes. She wanted so badly to look like the perfect mother that she never stopped to ask if she was being a good one. When I started spending more time with Daniel, sneaking out at night and ignoring curfews, the tension in the house became unbearable. The smell of lavender candles and polished wood couldn't hide the rot underneath. Mom's sharp sighs followed me everywhere. "You're wasting your potential," she'd say. "You'll regret this." But I didn't care. For once, I felt like I was choosing someone for myself. I remember one particular evening. The air heavy with the scent of rain and distant thunder. I came home late. Daniel's jacket draped over my shoulders, my hair still damp from the drizzle. Mom was waiting in the living room, arms crossed, a single lamp casting long shadows across her face. "Where were you?" she demanded. I told her the truth. "With Daniel." Her nostrils flared. "You're playing with fire," she hissed. "Do you want to end up like those girls who throw away their futures for men like that?" I wanted to scream that I wasn't one of those girls, that Daniel was kind, that I was in control, but deep down, I knew she wasn't really talking about me. She was talking about herself. About every path she'd never taken, every dream she'd suffocated under the weight of being perfect. Dad stepped into the room, his face drawn and weary. "Enough," he said. "You're embarrassing us." That was the word that broke me, embarrassing. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was a reflection they didn't like. That night, I sat on my bed, the sound of the wind howling outside, staring at the photos of our family trips, the fake smiles, the matching sweaters, the illusion of love. I thought about packing a bag, just to prove I could. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something more dangerous, resolve. I didn't know it yet, but I was standing at the edge of a storm, one that would change everything. The tension that had simmered for years was about to boil over into something irreversible. I could feel it in the air, heavy and electric, the same way you can sense lightning before it strikes. My parents believed they could control me with guilt and silence, that I'd always come crawling back for approval. But I had no idea how far they'd go to control me, or how far I'd have to go to break free. If you've ever stood at that crossroads between your family's expectations and your own freedom, drop a comment below, because this is where my real story begins. After that night, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to fit into a mold that was never made for me. My relationship with Daniel Reed became the one space where I could breathe freely, where every moment felt like an antidote to the poison I'd been swallowing for years. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized how cold my own home had become. His apartment was small, just one bedroom, with peeling paint and a window that overlooked the parking lot, but it was warm. Not just from the heater, but from him. The air always smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil, and the walls were lined with little pieces of his life. Sketches of old cars, a half-finished shelf he built himself, a worn denim jacket hanging on a chair. I'd sit cross-legged on his couch, sipping tea from a chipped mug, listening to the hum of his old fridge, and think, this feels more like home than anything I've ever known. He'd cook simple meals, eggs, rice, toast, and laugh when I offered to help, saying, "You've done enough for everyone else your whole life. Let someone take care of you for a change." That line stuck with me. It wasn't romantic in the usual way, it was grounding. For the first time, I felt seen without having to perform. But back at my parents' house, every step I took felt like walking on glass. My mother's smiles grew tighter, my father's silence heavier. I could hear their whispers through the paper-thin walls late at night, my name tossed around like a problem that needed solving. "She's wasting her life," Mom would say. "She doesn't understand what she's throwing away." And Dad's low voice would rumble back, "She'll learn the hard way." I used to press my pillow over my ears to drown them out, but it didn't work. The shame seeped through anyway. I tried to defend Daniel during family dinners, but every attempt ended the same way, with Mom's voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, the mechanic again?" And Teresa's awkward silence, her eyes darting between us like she wished she could disappear. Even the smell of dinner roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the scent of thyme started to make me nauseous because it always meant tension was coming. One evening, after yet another argument, I went to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and opened Reddit. I didn't post at first, I just read. Stories in R, divided by AITA, from people who'd been told they were disappointing their parents. People who'd been kicked out for falling in love with the wrong person. Each post felt like a mirror. I found comfort in the comments from strangers. "You're not crazy. You deserve respect. Love isn't a betrayal." Eventually, I made an anonymous post of my own. AITA for choosing my boyfriend over my family's expectations? I never expected it to blow up, but it did. Thousands of strangers wrote back, validating what I'd always known deep down. The problem wasn't me. It was the house I was trying to grow in the soil was poisoned. Around that time, I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Klein, and her office smelled faintly of lavender and books. On my first visit, I talked for nearly an hour straight about my mother's control, my father's silence, my sister's perfection, and Daniel. She listened quietly, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow pad. When I finally stopped, she said something that changed everything. "Elena, what you're describing isn't love. It's control masked as concern." She explained how toxic family dynamics often disguise themselves as guidance. "Parents like yours," she said gently, "believe love equals compliance, but real love respects individuality." I remember staring at the carpet, the pattern blurring as tears welled in my eyes. "So, it's not my fault?" I asked, my voice breaking. She smiled softly. "No. It's not your job to fix their unhappiness." That was the first time anyone had ever said that to me. I walked out of that session feeling lighter but also terrified. Because once you name toxicity, you can't unsee it. Every time my mother criticized Daniel or my father dismissed my feelings, I saw it for what it was. A cycle, not a truth. Daniel noticed the change in me before I did. "You don't flinch anymore when you talk about them," he said one night as we sat on his couch, the glow of the streetlight painting gold patterns on his face. I smiled weakly. "Maybe I'm just getting tired." He pulled me close, his hand warm against my back. Then rest, he whispered. You don't owe anyone your pain. The simplicity of his words hit me harder than any lecture or quote ever had. I started spending more nights at his place, finding solace in the steady rhythm of our life together, the morning coffee brewing, the hum of his old stereo, the way he'd hum to himself while fixing a carburetor. Every detail felt like a quiet rebellion against the chaos I'd left behind. But my absences didn't go unnoticed. One Friday evening, I came home to find my mother waiting by the door, her arms crossed, her perfume sharp and overpowering. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "At Daniel's," I said plainly. Her eyes narrowed. "You're making a fool of yourself." My father appeared behind her, his face stone. "You're disrespecting this family," he said, his tone flat but final. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering. Maybe this family needs to learn what respect actually means. The silence that followed was deafening. For a split second, I thought I saw something flicker in my mother's eyes. Fear, maybe, but then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. "If you leave with him," she said slowly, "don't expect to come back." I didn't answer. I just turned, grabbed my coat, and walked out. The door slammed behind me, a sound that would echo in my memory for years. When I arrived at Daniel's apartment, he didn't ask questions. He just opened the door, pulled me in, and held me. The warmth hit me immediately, the scent of cinnamon candles, the hum of his old heater, the sound of rain tapping against the window. It felt like crossing from one world into another. I sank into the couch, exhaustion washing over me. "I think I just burned every bridge I had," I whispered. Daniel sat beside me, his eyes steady. "Then we'll build our own." It was such a simple promise, but it felt monumental. Over the next few weeks, I started moving my things into his place, one box at a time, small steps toward a new beginning. My clothes mixed with his, my books stacked beside his tools, our lives slowly weaving together. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was choosing peace. But peace has a way of making people uncomfortable, especially those who built their power on your chaos. I could sense the storm brewing long before it hit. The texts from my mother grew more frequent and cutting. "We raised you better than this. Daniel will ruin you. Don't throw your future away." I didn't reply at first, but silence only made her angrier. Then came the calls, voicemails filled with guilt, accusations, even tears. Teresa tried to mediate, sending me long messages about how Mom was just worried and Dad wasn't sleeping. It almost worked, almost until I realized those weren't apologies. They were manipulations disguised as concern. Daniel told me, "They're losing control. That's why they're panicking." And he was right. But even as I built a new life with him, a small voice inside me wondered if I'd truly escaped. I started writing in a journal, something Dr. Klein suggested. Each entry became a map of my healing. The smell of Daniel's coffee in the morning, the way sunlight hit the walls at noon, the comfort of having someone who listened without judgment. But beneath the peace, I could feel something shifting, a tension gathering like pressure before a storm. My mother wasn't the type to let go quietly, and deep down, I knew she wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. One night, as Daniel and I lay in bed, the city lights flickering through the blinds, I whispered, "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" He laughed softly. "By who?" But my gut twisted, because I knew exactly who. My family had already proven how far they'd go to control me, and I had no idea what they were planning next. Something was brewing, and it was about to shatter everything. The storm hit on a Thursday night. I still remember the way the air felt that day. Thick, heavy, almost electric, like the world was holding its breath. My parents had been calling all week, but I ignored them, thinking that silence would make them stop. It didn't. That night, there was a knock at Daniel's door. When I opened it, my mother was standing there, her coat dusted with snow, her lipstick perfect as ever, and my father just behind her, expression carved from stone. The smell of her perfume, sharp and floral, hit me like a trigger, dragging me back to every argument we'd ever had. "We need to talk," she said. Daniel glanced at me, hesitant, but I nodded and let them in. The moment they stepped inside, the warmth of our apartment vanished. My mother's eyes darted around, scanning the mismatched furniture, the old heater, the cracked walls as if cataloging evidence of my failure. "So, this is how you're living now?" she said finally, her tone flat but loaded. "With him?" Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. My father crossed his arms. "We didn't raise you for this, Elena," he said. "You're throwing away everything for a man who'll never give you stability." I felt the old anger rising in my chest. "Stability?" I snapped. "You mean control, because that's all this is to you, me not doing what you want." Mom's lips thinned. "You're being dramatic." The argument spiraled, fast accusations, raised voices, years of resentment bursting open like a dam. "You embarrassed us," she shouted. "You embarrassed yourself." I shot back. "At least I'm living honestly." And then came the sentence that would echo in my head for years. "If you walk out that door, don't ever call us again." It was almost poetic. How the timing worked out. Outside, the wind had picked up, snow slanting sideways under the yellow streetlight. I grabbed my coat, my hands shaking, and looked back one last time. Mom's face was pale, her eyes glassy, but she didn't move. Dad turned away. So I did what I always feared I'd have to. I walked out. The cold hit me like a slap. Each step crunched against the snow. Each breath burned in my lungs. I thought I'd feel free, but instead, I felt hollow, like I'd left a piece of myself behind in that house. Something I'd never get back. Daniel followed me outside a minute later, wrapping his jacket around my shoulders. "It's over," I whispered. "No," he said quietly. "It's just beginning." We stood there under the streetlight, snow falling around us, our breath visible in the freezing air. In that moment, I believed him. I wanted to believe that love could replace the family I'd lost. That night, he held me close as I cried, whispering that we'd build something better together. For a while, it seemed like we did. The next few months were peaceful, almost soft around the edges. We found a rhythm working, cooking, laughing, sometimes staying up late watching movies. The quiet was healing. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and detergent, the kind of scent that feels safe. I started a small art project, selling prints online, while Daniel worked longer hours at the garage. But beneath the surface, small cracks began to form. He grew quieter, distracted. His phone buzzed more often, and when I'd ask who it was, he'd brush it off. "Just work stuff," he'd say with a tight smile. At first, I believed him. Then, I started noticing changes: the late-night texts, the way he'd turn his screen away, the extra hours that didn't add up. One evening, I caught a faint whiff of perfume on his jacket, sweet, expensive, nothing like mine. I froze, that scent pulling me straight back into my mother's presence, her judgment, her sharpness. I laughed it off at first, telling myself I was overthinking. But the doubt settled in, like frost on glass, silent, spreading. I brought it up during my next session with Dr. Klein. "How do you know when you're being paranoid versus when something's actually wrong?" I asked. She leaned back, studying me. "Trust isn't blind, Elena," she said softly. "It's built. If you feel unsafe or dismissed, that's your intuition, not paranoia." I remember nodding, feeling both validated and terrified. She mentioned that over 50% of people experience emotional distress after relational betrayal, whether it's romantic or familial. "It's because betrayal attacks your sense of reality," she explained. "You start questioning not just them but yourself." That line haunted me for weeks. Every time Daniel smiled at me, every time he said, "I love you," I wondered if I was questioning the wrong person or the right one. By December, the tension between us was impossible to ignore. The nights grew longer, the air colder, and silence filled the spaces where laughter used to be. I started spending more time online again, scrolling through Reddit, searching for stories that sounded like mine. In one thread on r divided by relationships, a woman wrote about discovering her boyfriend's emotional affair after noticing perfume on his hoodie. The parallels made my chest tighten. I read the comments like scripture: "Trust your gut." Silence is often confession in disguise. I didn't post this time. I just scrolled, my heart sinking with every story that mirrored my own. It was strange how thousands of strangers could see what I was too scared to admit. Then, one night, everything shattered. Daniel had been distant all week, claiming overtime shifts at the garage. Around midnight, while he slept, his phone buzzed. Normally I wouldn't look. I hate the idea of snooping. But something in me, some mix of fear and instinct, made me pick it up. The message preview froze my blood. "Can't wait to see you again, babe. Same time tomorrow?" My chest tightened, my hands shaking as I opened the message thread. There it was, months of texts from someone named Erica. Photos. Jokes. Words that used to be mine. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I didn't wake him. I just walked into the bathroom, sat on the cold tile, and cried silently until my body ached. The next morning, I left before he woke up. I didn't even take my coat, just my phone, my keys, and my shattered sense of reality. Outside, the snow was falling again, soft and relentless. My breath fogged the air as I walked aimlessly through the streets, numb to everything but the sound of my boots crunching on the ice. Betrayal has a strange way of feeling both sharp and empty at once, like being stabbed with something invisible. I ended up at a coffee shop, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I ordered tea, sat in the corner, and opened Reddit again. This time, I wrote, "Found out my boyfriend's been cheating after I gave up everything for him. How do you even start over when you have no one left?" Within minutes, responses poured in. Strangers from around the world sent comfort, advice, stories of their own heartbreak. One comment stood out. "You didn't lose a home, you left a cage. Now it's time to build one made of truth." I saved that one. I still have it. That night, I went back to the apartment, the light still on inside. Daniel was waiting for me, pacing, guilt written all over his face. "Elena, please," he started, his voice cracking. "It wasn't what you think." I laughed bitterly. Then explained the messages. The photos. He tried, fumbling over excuses, saying it was just texting, that he didn't mean it. But every word felt like another lie stacked on top of the last. I stood there, tears blurring my vision, and realized something painful. I'd traded one kind of manipulation for another. My parents' control had been loud. Daniel's was quiet, dressed in warmth and promises. I thought leaving my family meant finding freedom. But maybe I'd just found a different kind of cage. He begged me to stay. Said we could fix it. But I couldn't. "You were supposed to be my safe place," I whispered. "And now I don't even know who you are." I packed what little I could carry and left that night. The snow was falling again. Always the snow. Always cold when things ended. As I walked down the street, I felt both broken and strangely clear. My therapist once said that healing isn't about finding peace, it's about surviving chaos without losing yourself. I finally understood what she meant. My family's rejection had hurt, but this betrayal cut deeper, because it proved that even love could be conditional. Still, I kept walking. The cold wind stung my cheeks, mixing with tears, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. And yet, as I reached the end of the block, my phone buzzed. It was an anonymous message from an unknown number. "You think he only lied about the cheating? You should see what else he's hiding." My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen. My breath caught in my throat. The snow fell heavier now, each flake melting against my skin like a warning. I didn't know who sent it, or what they meant, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because sometimes, the worst betrayal isn't what you discover first. It's what's waiting underneath. And what I discovered next, I would break me. I didn't look back when I walked away from Daniel's apartment for the last time. The snow had thickened into a white wall, swallowing the streetlights and muffling every sound except the crunch of my boots and the roar of the wind. It was one of those nights where the world feels too big, too cold, and you feel like you could vanish and no one would notice. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, more missed calls. more messages from him. I couldn't bring myself to read them. I just kept walking, my coat pulled tight around me, my fingers numb. Each gust of wind stung my face, but the pain almost felt comforting. It reminded me I was still here, still alive. I reached the bus depot near the edge of town, my breath fogging the air as I stepped inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The air smelled of wet wool and cheap coffee. I sat on one of the hard plastic benches, shivering, clutching my bag like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The truth was, I had nowhere to go. My family's number was still in my phone, but I couldn't call them. Not after everything. I thought about my mother, how cold she'd been that night, her eyes full of fury instead of love, and yet, somewhere deep down, I wondered if she was worried. I later learned that around 32.9% of caregivers struggle with mental health issues from stress and burnout, and it finally made sense. Maybe her cruelty wasn't pure malice. Maybe it was exhaustion, fear, and the unhealed trauma she'd never learned to name. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. The wind howled outside the depot, rattling the doors. I stared at the ticket board, not knowing where I wanted to go, only that it had to be far from here. My body trembled, not just from cold but from the weight of everything I'd lost. My family, my home, the man I thought I could trust. I must have looked pathetic, because that's when a stranger approached me. She was a woman in her 50s, wearing a red wool coat and holding a thermos. "You look frozen, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft and warm. She handed me the thermos without waiting for an answer. "Hot chocolate," she added. The first sip nearly made me cry. It was rich, sweet, and tasted like every forgotten piece of kindness I'd been missing. She sat beside me, not asking questions, just existing quietly next to me like she somehow knew that silence was the only language I could handle. After a while, she said, "You remind me of my daughter. She ran away once too. Life breaks us, but it also rebuilds us. Don't forget that." Then she stood, smiled faintly, and walked away before I could even ask her name. I don't know why, but that moment saved me more than any apology or love ever had. When the last bus left and the depot emptied, I made a decision. I pulled out my phone and texted Lena, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in months. She was one of the few people who'd never judged me for my choices, even when everyone else did. "I need a place to crash," I wrote. "Just for a few days." Her reply came almost instantly. "Come over. No questions." Relief flooded through me so fast I nearly dropped my phone. I walked back out into the storm, the wind slapping against my face, but this time, I didn't feel so alone. The world was still brutal, yes, but it no longer felt like it was trying to erase me. The snowflakes stung, but beneath it all, there was a strange sense of clarity, like the storm was cleansing everything that had been rotten in my life. By the time I reached Lena's apartment, I could barely feel my fingers. She opened the door before I even knocked, pulling me into a hug so tight it nearly broke me. Her place smelled of cinnamon and vanilla candles, and for a moment, it felt like stepping into a dream. "You look like hell," she said softly, handing me a blanket. "But you're safe here." That night, I curled up on her couch, listening to the faint hum of the city outside and the rhythmic ticking of her old wall clock. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that. I just stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led me here. My therapist's voice echoed in my head. "Protect your worth, Elena. Even when you're alone, your worth doesn't disappear. You just have to stop giving it to people who can't handle it." I repeated that line to myself until I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the blinds. It felt almost cruel, how bright and beautiful the world looked after the storm. Lena made pancakes and forced me to eat, even though I had no appetite. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, sitting across from me. "But you can't hide forever. You have to start living again." Her words sank deep, though I wasn't ready to face them yet. I spent the next few days helping her around the apartment, scrolling through Reddit when I couldn't sleep. That's when I stumbled upon a community called R Divided by Empower After Breakup, a space filled with people reclaiming their lives after betrayal. I started reading their stories, each one raw and painfully familiar. Some had left toxic families, others abusive partners. But the common thread was the same: survival. I started posting 2 tiny snippets of my journey, not using my real name, just E. Thompson. The response was overwhelming. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, shared coping strategies, even quotes from therapists that echoed Dr. Klein's teachings. For the first time, the internet didn't feel like an escape, it felt like a community. Dr. Klein called me for a virtual check-in around that time. Her face appeared on my cracked phone screen, calm as always. "You look tired," she said gently, "but stronger." I told her everything: the fight, the betrayal, the message, the storm. She listened quietly, then said something that still rings in my ears. "You've spent years trusting people who broke you, Elena. It's time to learn how to trust yourself. That's where real healing begins." I asked her how. She smiled faintly. "By keeping the promises you make to yourself, no matter how small. Start there." So I did. I promised myself I'd stop calling pain love. I promised I'd rebuild, not for revenge, not for validation, but for peace. In the weeks that followed, I started to come alive again, slowly. Lena and I took long walks through the city, talking about nothing and everything. I applied for a new job at a design studio. Something creative, something that finally felt like me. The nights were still hard sometimes. I'd wake up from dreams where I was back in that house, hearing my mother's voice or smelling Daniel's cologne. But each morning, it hurt a little less. The storm outside eventually melted, and with it, the frost that had coated my heart for years. One evening, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I thought about the woman at the bus depot, the stranger who'd given me hot chocolate and hope. I wondered if she'd ever found her daughter, or if she'd somehow known that her kindness would ripple through my life long after she walked away. The world felt fragile but full again, like it was waiting for me to take the next step. I know now that survival isn't a single moment, it's a series of choices, made one heartbeat at a time. Choosing to walk away, choosing to heal, choosing to believe that pain isn't the end of the story. I still have scars from that night, from that love, from that family, but scars don't mean broken. They mean healed. They mean lived. And yet, as I stared out at the quiet streets, the city lights flickering like stars, I felt something stirring deep inside me, a sense that my journey wasn't over. My therapist once said, "The universe will keep testing your boundaries until you learn to protect them." I didn't know what was coming next, but I could feel it: a new challenge, a new lesson, maybe even a reckoning. Because healing isn't linear, and peace isn't permanent. But the next step would demand everything I had. The morning sunlight spilled through my apartment window like a quiet victory, touching every corner of the space I had built from nothing. It had been months since that stormy night at the bus depot, and though the world still carried traces of pain, I finally felt the weight of survival turning into strength. I enrolled in evening courses for digital design, something I'd always wanted but never dared to pursue when I was still under my family's control. Sitting in that classroom for the first time, surrounded by strangers and the hum of computer screens, I felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. It wasn't easy. There were nights when doubt clawed at me, when I still heard my mother's voice in my head saying I'd never make it on my own. But every project I completed, every small compliment from my instructor, became a brick in the new foundation of my life. I started freelancing, building designs for small businesses, and soon my name started circulating in local creative circles. It wasn't fame, it was something deeper. Quiet respect. Studies show that 70% of people feel empowered after breaking free from toxic ties, and I understood that now. Empowerment didn't come from revenge or validation. It came from finally owning the life you were told you couldn't have. One night, I decided to share my story online, not to expose, but to inspire. I uploaded a video titled, "The Night I Walked Away," on a small storytelling channel I'd started as a side project. I expected maybe a few dozen views, but within days, the comments poured in thousands of people, sharing their own stories of walking away from toxic families, manipulative partners, and painful expectations. People from everywhere. Single mothers, college students, burned out professionals. My inbox filled with gratitude and tears. Someone wrote, "I watched this at 2 a.m. after packing my things to leave my ex. You reminded me I'm not crazy." Another said, "Your story saved me from going back." That's when I realized something I never expected. The act of telling my truth became my revenge, my redemption, and my rebirth all at once. The video went viral, gaining millions of views over a few months. And for once, the narrative of my life wasn't written by someone else, it was mine. Around that same time, my sister, Grace, reached out. It started with a simple text. "Mom wants to talk." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I'm not ready." She sent another message later that night. "Neither is she. But she's sorry." A few years ago, that would have been enough to pull me back into the cycle of guilt and false forgiveness. But I'd learned the hard way that not every apology deserves a return. I sent one final message. "I hope she finds peace. But I've found mine elsewhere." I turned off my phone after that. Some bridges don't need to be burned, they simply dissolve when you stop walking across them. And yet, I didn't feel bitterness. For the first time, I could think of my family and not ache. I could remember the cold snow of that night and feel gratitude instead of shame, because that night forced me to choose myself, and that choice had rewritten everything. As for Daniel, well, life has a way of balancing scales you thought were permanently tipped. A friend sent me a screenshot one morning. His business had gone under, following a lawsuit for fraud and manipulation. It was surreal seeing his name in headlines, not because I felt joy in his downfall, but because I finally understood that karma doesn't always roar, it whispers. I didn't comment. Didn't reach out. I just sipped my coffee in my sunlit kitchen, the scent of freshly baked muffins filling the air, and smiled quietly to myself. That was closure enough. My life had bloomed in ways I couldn't have imagined. I was working full-time at a creative agency now, mentoring interns who reminded me of who I used to be: hungry, scared, but full of potential. And somewhere in between, I met someone new. His name was Aaron. He wasn't a savior or a fairy tale. He was calm, patient, and real. Our relationship grew slowly, built not on rescue, but on respect. He never tried to fix me. He just stood beside me as I fixed myself. Sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, we'd cook breakfast together, music playing low, the smell of coffee and pancakes filling our little apartment. And in those moments, I realized that peace wasn't the absence of pain, it was the presence of authenticity. One day, I got an email from a university inviting me to speak at a seminar on personal resilience and creative empowerment. Standing on that stage, sharing my story with rows of students and young professionals, I saw tears, nods, and quiet strength reflected back at me. Afterward, a girl approached me and said, "I think my mom treats me like yours did. How did you find the courage to leave?" I looked her in the eyes and said, "By realizing that love without respect isn't love at all." She cried, hugged me, and I saw a piece of my younger self in her trembling hands. That night, walking home under the city lights, I whispered a silent thank you to the girl I used to be, the one who stood in the snow, shaking but unbroken. Healing hadn't been pretty. It wasn't linear, and it wasn't cinematic. It was therapy sessions, late-night breakdowns, burnt dinners, job rejections, and moments of unbearable loneliness. But it was also laughter, friendship, purpose, and a deep, unshakable pride in the woman I had become. If I could speak to anyone listening right now, anyone who feels trapped under the weight of expectation, manipulation, or fear, I'd tell you this. Never beg for love. Build your own path. Your worth isn't measured by who accepts you, it's proven by who you become when no one does. You don't owe your past an explanation, you owe your future a chance. And you're stronger than the storm that tried to drown you. As I sit here now, In my warm apartment, filled with sunlight and soft music, I can finally breathe without flinching. The girl who once thought she needed her family's approval to exist, now creates, loves, and lives on her own terms. The cycle has ended, and in its place stands a life built from courage, forgiveness, and fire. If this story resonated with you, remember, healing doesn't erase your past, it redefines it. You are not the broken chapters they left behind. You are the author of what comes next. So tell me, what lessons have you learned from standing up for yourself? Share your thoughts below. Someone out there might need your story to find their strength. And if you've ever walked away from something that no longer served your soul, know this: that first step was your beginning, not your end.